He came to the Philippines with a blueprint for the perfect retirement, and someone was waiting to steal it before the foundation was ever poured. This is the story of Ronald, a viewer who reached out after spending 14 months watching his dream retirement home disappear, piece by piece, not through bad luck, not through natural disaster, but through the hands of people who had done it before and would do it again. Ronald asked that only his first name be used. He said the shame was still too fresh. But he also said he couldn't stay silent, not when he knew that right now, as you watch this, other men just like him are standing on plots of land they will never legally own, writing checks to contractors who will never finish building, and trusting a woman whose warmth was rehearsed long before she ever shook their hand. What happened to Ronald isn't rare. It isn't even unusual. It is, according to expat victim networks operating across Cebu, Dumaguete, and Manila, one of the most quietly devastating financial crimes targeting foreign retirees in Southeast Asia today, and most victims never report it, because by the time they understand what happened, they are too broken, too far from home, and too ashamed to speak. This is his story. Pay attention, because the details matter. My name is Ronald Chambers, and I want to tell you about the retirement I built in my mind for 34 years, and the 14 months it took someone else to dismantle it. I grew up in Tucson, Arizona. Worked for the municipal utility company straight out of college. Electrical engineering, not glamorous, not the kind of work people write books about, but it was mine. I understood systems. I understood how things were supposed to connect, what happened when a circuit failed, how to trace a fault back to its source. I was methodical. My colleagues called me the most patient man in any room, and they meant it as a compliment. I was married once, 19 years to a woman named Carol. She left when I was 48, not dramatically, not with shouting or accusations, just a quiet accumulation of distance that I had apparently been too focused on work to notice building. She told me I was emotionally unavailable, that living with me felt like living alone with better appliances. I didn't argue because I didn't know how to. I just watched her go and went back to work. We had no children. I had no fallback, no daily structure built around someone else's needs. Just the job, the house in the Catalina foothills, and the slow discovery that I had organized my entire life around a routine that felt increasingly hollow. Retirement came at 61. I had $3,200 a month in pension, $1,100 from Social Security, and roughly $310,000 in accessible savings and home equity. By every measurable standard, I was comfortable. By every internal standard, I was adrift. I had started reading about expat retirement in Southeast Asia, the way some men read about fishing lodges or mountain cabins as a fantasy at first. Then, with increasing seriousness, the numbers made sense. The cost of living in the Philippines was a fraction of Arizona. The weather was warm, year-round. The culture was English-speaking, Catholic, and by most accounts genuinely welcoming to foreign retirees. I read blogs. I joined Facebook groups. I watched YouTube channels made by men my age who had made the move and looked, frankly, more alive than I felt sitting in my kitchen eating reheated pasta. In the spring of 2021, I flew to Cebu for a 3-week scouting trip. I ate fresh seafood at open-air restaurants for less than $5 a plate. I sat on a beach in the south of the island and watched the sun drop into the water and thought, this is where I should be spending whatever time I have left. I flew home, sold the condo, liquidated a portion of my retirement fund, and returned to Cebu with $290,000 and the intention of building a modest home where I could live out my remaining decades in peace. I had no idea that someone had already been told I was coming. The recommendation appeared in one of the expat Facebook groups I had been following for months. Someone posted asking for reliable real estate agents in Cebu. Someone honest. Someone who understood the specific legal challenges foreigners face when trying to acquire property in the Philippines. Within 20 minutes, a reply appeared from an account I had seen active in the group before. The name was familiar, though I could not have told you from which specific post. The reply said, "Talk to Maricel Fontanilla, licensed agent, specializes in expat acquisitions. She helped me buy my house without a single complication. Honestly, the most trustworthy person I've dealt with in this country. I saved the name and sent her a message that evening. She responded within the hour. Professional, warm, and specific. She didn't send a generic greeting. She referenced the group, acknowledged that expat property acquisition was a complicated process, and offered a free consultation at a coffee shop near my rental apartment in the Mabelo district. She suggested a time that worked for her, but immediately added that she was flexible if I needed to adjust. Small detail, but it registered. We met. 3 days later. Maricel Fontanilla was 29 years old, petite, and dressed in a way that read as deliberately understated pressed slacks, a modest blouse, no visible jewelry except small gold earrings. She arrived 5 minutes early. She brought printed property listings organized by region and price point, a folder of what appeared to be client testimonials, and a small spiral notebook in which she took handwritten notes as I spoke. I told her what I was looking for. A modest lot, ideally near the coast, south of the city, where the development was newer and the noise was manageable. A property where I could build something simple, 2 bedrooms, a covered porch, something I could actually maintain on a retirement income. She listened. She did not interrupt. When I finished, she asked 3 follow-up questions, all of them precise and practical. Then she said, "I want to be honest with you, Ronald. This market is full of agents who will show you whatever makes the fastest commission. I don't work that way. If a property isn't right for you, I will tell you." I drove home that evening thinking I had found exactly the kind of professional I needed in a country where I was still learning the rules. Over the following 6 weeks, Maricel took me on property tours across southern Cebu and into the surrounding municipalities. She drove. She knew the roads, the local officials, the history of each parcel. When I expressed hesitation about a property, and I expressed it often, because I am not a fast decision maker, she agreed with me. She never pushed. Once, on a tour of a lot near Karkar City that I had initially found promising, she was the one who pointed out that the drainage situation would make rainy season living miserable. She talked me out of a purchase she would have earned a commission on. That was the moment I stopped treating her as a service provider and started treating her as an ally. The texts began around week 3. Not unprofessional, not flirtatious, just check-ins. How was I adjusting to the humidity? Had I found a good market near the apartment? Had I tried the Lechon place she mentioned on Colon Street? I answered them. I found myself answering them at length. I was living alone in a furnished apartment in a city where I knew almost no one. And she was the closest thing I had to a daily conversation with another human being. She began sharing details about her own life in the same careful, incremental way. Her mother in Cagayan de Oro, dealing with a heart condition that required expensive maintenance medication. Her younger brother, 22, whom she was putting through an engineering degree at a university in Cebu City. She wasn't asking for anything when she shared these things. She was simply talking the way people talk when they trust each other. And I, a man who had been told my entire marriage that I didn't know how to connect, found that I was connecting. By week 6, I asked her to dinner. She accepted. She kept the tone professional for 3 consecutive dinners, which, looking back, was itself the manipulation. She was giving me the experience of pursuing someone who required patience, which is exactly the kind of pursuit that makes a methodical, proud man feel that he has earned something real. By the 8th week, the dynamic had shifted. A touch on the arm, a longer goodbye outside the restaurant, nothing rushed. By the time we became something more than professional acquaintances, I had already decided, without any romantic influence clouding the decision, that Maricel Fontanilla was the most trustworthy person I had met in the Philippines. The romance didn't create my trust. It was layered on top of trust that had been built on purpose, brick by careful brick, long before she ever touched my arm. It was during the 11th week that she called me on a Tuesday afternoon with a particular kind of urgency in her voice. Controlled urgency, the kind that suggested she had important news but didn't want to alarm me unnecessarily. She asked if we could meet that evening. She had found something. The lot was in the southern part of Cebu, roughly 40 minutes from the city, situated on a gently sloping stretch of coastline where the water was still clear and the nearest development was a cluster of modest barangay houses half a kilometer away. The land itself was real. I walked every meter of it. I stood at the edge where the grass gave way to a low limestone shelf above the waterline and looked out at the Tanyan Strait and felt something shift behind my ribs. The specific sensation of a man recognizing the place where he wants to grow old. The price was 2.8 million pesos, approximately $50,000 at the exchange rate at the time. Maricel explained the legal situation clearly and without apparent hesitation. Foreigners cannot own land in the Philippines outright. But there were two legitimate structures available: a long-term lease agreement, renewable or acquisition through a Philippine corporation in which a foreign national could hold up to 40%. She explained both options, their relative advantages, their risks. She recommended the long-term lease as the simpler path. She offered to handle all documentation through a title transfer agency she had worked with on several previous transactions. I asked her to give me 48 hours to think it over. I spent those 48 hours doing what I always did when evaluating a significant decision. I researched. I read about foreign land acquisition in the Philippines. I found forums confirming that the legal structures she had described were real and commonly used. I found nothing alarming. The price was below market. She had explained this by saying the elderly landowner needed to sell quickly for medical reasons, a situation she had confirmed with documentation she showed me before I asked. I wired $52,000 to the account she provided, which she described as belonging to the title transfer agency. 3 weeks later, she handed me a folder of documents, a notarized lease agreement, a tax declaration, a transfer certificate of title bearing the name of a holding entity she said I effectively controlled. I held those papers and believed I was a landowner. The contractor arrived in month 5. His name was Bong, a nickname, he said, universally used in lieu of his given name, which was Bonifacio. He was well-dressed in the way that serious professionals are well-dressed. Clean shoes, a collared shirt, a leather folder. He laid out architectural drawings across the table of a restaurant in Talisay City and walked me through them with the fluency of someone who had done this many times. The plans were for exactly what I had described to Maricel. A modest 2-bedroom home, a covered porch facing the water, a practical layout designed for one person living comfortably rather than for entertaining. He had apparently been briefed in detail. The quote was $68,000, structured in progressive tranches, 30% upfront to mobilize materials and labor, then draws triggered by each verified construction milestone. I asked the reasonable questions. How long had he been in business? Could he provide references? Was he registered with the appropriate Philippine contractor licensing body? He answered everything. The references were names and phone numbers. The registration, he said, would be easy to verify. He offered the license number himself and suggested I look it up. Looking back, I understand what that offer was. Telling a careful man to verify something yourself while providing him with a number that either checks out superficially or that he never quite gets around to checking creates the feeling of diligence without the reality of it. I told myself I would look it up that evening. I don't think I ever did. I paid the first tranche $20,400, and Maricel took me to the lot 2 weeks later where 3 workers were clearing vegetation and a small pile of hollow blocks had been delivered to the roadside edge of the property. It looked like construction. It felt like progress. The second payment of $15,300 came a month later when Maricel sent photographs of what appeared to be foundation work. The third payment of $14,200 followed the arrival of framing materials. The fourth and final payment I made $11,100 came after Bong presented photographs of partially completed exterior walls. Then the delays began. The first explanation was a typhoon that had disrupted supply chains in the Visayas plausible, since that particular season had been active. The second was a permitting issue with the local barangay that Maricel said she was personally handling. The third was a supplier in Mandaue City who had apparently ceased operations, creating a shortage of specific roofing materials. Each explanation arrived with visible emotion from Maricel. She was frustrated, she said. She was embarrassed. She had recommended Bong based on his past performance and felt personally responsible. She was fighting for me, she said. She was on the phone with the barangay captain. She was sourcing alternative suppliers. She needed me to be patient. I was patient. I had been patient my entire professional life. Patience was the thing I was best at. But underneath the patience, something else was growing, a cold, formless unease that I could not yet name. By month 9, I had driven past the lot twice without telling Maricel. The exterior walls were exactly as they had appeared in the photographs she sent 3 months earlier. Nothing had moved. There was no equipment, no workers, no sign of recent activity. Just walls, standing alone in the coastal wind, surrounded by tall grass that had grown back around the foundation. When I confronted Maricel, she had a new explanation waiting. She had been trying to protect me from an escalating situation, she said. A title dispute had emerged. A second family, apparently descended from the original landowner, was now claiming partial ownership of the lot. Their claim had been filed with the Registry of Deeds in Cebu City, and until it was resolved, construction could not legally continue. This was when the lawyer appeared. His name was never fully clear to me. He introduced himself with a name I couldn't quite catch over the noise of the restaurant where we met, and his business card, which I still have somewhere, listed a law office in Cebu City that I later discovered had no verifiable registration, but he presented himself with total authority. He had the cadence of someone accustomed to being believed. He explained the title dispute in technical detail, specific provisions of the property registration decree, the procedure for resolving competing claims before the land court, the role of what he called facilitation payments to expedite the Registry of Deeds process, the total required to resolve the dispute, $18,000. He said it the way a plumber tells you what it will cost to replace your pipes, with the tone of someone delivering unfortunate but straightforward professional news. I agreed to pay half of it. Immediately $9,000, with the second half contingent on evidence of progress. Maricel signed a document as my agent. The lawyer stamped something. I went home and sat in my apartment looking at the ceiling for a long time. The British man's name was Graham. I had seen him around the expat community, a retired secondary school teacher from Yorkshire who had been living in Cebu for 6 years, and who had the particular bluntness of someone who had long since stopped caring what strangers thought of him. We had spoken briefly at 2 community events, but were not friends. He invited me for a beer one evening after seeing a post I had made in one of the expat forums asking about title dispute resolution timelines. We sat at an open-air bar near the IT park. He ordered San Miguel. He let me explain the situation from the beginning without interrupting. When I finished, he set down his bottle and looked at me with an expression that was not unkind but contained absolutely no softness. "Ronald," he said, "I need you to listen to me very carefully. What you've just described is a title fraud. There is no resolution coming. The title dispute is manufactured. The lawyer is part of the team. They will keep generating new problems, new disputes, new fees, new crises, until you either run out of money or leave the country. That is the entire mechanism." I told him I believed Maricel was acting in good faith, that she had been my agent throughout this process, that she had signed documents on my behalf, that she had fought for me visibly and consistently. Graham looked at me for a moment. Then he said, "That's what they want you to believe. The agent being on your side is the whole point. If she were obviously against you, you'd have walked away in month 1. I drove home that night and did not sleep. The following morning, I contacted a Philippine attorney independently, a woman I found through the local bar association rather than through any expat referral. I paid her consultation fee in cash. I gave her the folder of documents Maricel had given me 14 months earlier. She called me 2 days later. Her voice was careful and precise, the way a doctor's voice is careful and precise when the news is not good. The transfer certificate of title bore a property description that did not match the GPS coordinates of the lot I had visited. The notarization stamp on the lease agreement was from a notary whose license had lapsed 2 years before the document was dated. The title transfer agency listed as the recipient of my initial wire payment was not registered with the Professional Regulation Commission or any relevant government body. The name of the registered company bore only a superficial resemblance to a legitimate agency operating in Cebu City close enough to seem familiar, different enough that it was legally a different entity entirely. I asked about Bong. She confirmed that no contractor matching the license number he had provided appeared in the Philippine Contractors Accreditation Board registry. I sat in her office on a plastic chair while she continued speaking, but I had stopped processing the words. I was calculating. $52,000 for the land, $61,000 for the construction, $9,000 for the legal fees, another $6,400 in permits and notary fees, and miscellaneous urgent payments that had accumulated so gradually I had stopped tracking them individually. $128,400. Gone. I confronted Maricel that same evening. I drove to the coffee shop where we had first met and sent her a message asking her to come. She came, which surprised me. I had expected evasion. Instead, she arrived in the same pressed slacks and modest blouse, sat across from me, and before I had finished laying out what the attorney had told me, she began to cry. Not quietly. The tears were real, or performed well enough to be indistinguishable from real. She said Bong had deceived her. She said the lawyer had been recommended to her by someone she trusted, and she had been as blindsided as I was. She said she had been asking for updates from Bong for months and receiving nothing. She said she loved me, that she had never intended for this to happen, that she was going to find a way to fix it. She reached across the table and put her hand on mine. I did not pull my hand away immediately. That is the detail I find hardest to write. I sat there with her hand on mine while some part of my brain, the careful, systematic part that had spent 34 years tracing faults back to their source, was quietly assembling the complete picture. And another part of me was still hoping she would give me one piece of evidence that made the picture wrong. She didn't send any further money that night, but I lost 3 weeks trying to verify her story before the independent attorney's findings made the conclusion unavoidable. On a Tuesday, I sent Maricel a message asking for the contact information of the title transfer agency so I could confront them directly. She read it. She did not reply. On Thursday, I called her phone. The line had been disconnected. Her Facebook profile, which I had viewed that same morning, no longer existed by afternoon. Her WhatsApp, her Viber, the email address she had used for property documentation, all of it gone. With the precise efficiency of something that had been prepared in advance. I sat in my apartment in the Mabalo district and understood, finally and completely, that I had been a project. The Philippine National Police Anti-Cybercrime Group accepted my complaint. An officer logged it with the careful courtesy of someone who has seen this exact document many times. I provided the folder of fraudulent documentation, the wire transfer records, the name Bong, the name Maricel Fontanella, the business card from the lawyer. The officer told me these cases were difficult. Foreign complainants frequently left the country before proceedings advanced, which weakened the evidentiary chain. Suspects were often mobile. Accounts were emptied quickly and closed. He said they would do what they could. Maricel was eventually interviewed. She told investigators she had also been deceived, that she had referred Ronald to Bong in good faith and had been unaware that the title documentation was fraudulent. Without direct evidence linking her to the receiving accounts, and the accounts had been opened under names, I had never heard the case stalled at the preliminary stage. Bong was not located. The lawyer was not located. The title transfer agency, such as it was, existed only on paper. I spent the weeks after the complaint in a state that I can only describe as mechanical. I ate. I slept in short intervals. I walked along the Cebu City waterfront in the evenings because the movement helped more than sitting still. I did not book a flight back to Arizona, and when I examined why, the answer was both simple and devastating. I no longer owned anything there. The condo was sold. The furniture was gone. The colleagues I had spent 34 years working alongside had their own lives, their own families, their own complete worlds. Going back meant returning to a city where I had already erased my own footprint. I had liquidated my American life to fund the one that turned out not to exist. It was another American, a retired school teacher from Michigan, named Doug, who told me about the support group. It met on Tuesday evenings, in the back room of a cafe near Ayala Center. I went once out of reluctant practicality and found 12 men seated in plastic chairs around a folding table. British, American, Australian, German, Norwegian. Different ages, different backgrounds, different points on the spectrum between functional and shattered. But the same story, told with different names and faces and amounts. A Canadian named Peter had lost $190,000 through a nearly identical property scheme in the province of Negros Oriental. The agent had been male in his case, and the romantic element was absent, but the architecture was the same. The planted referral, the legitimate license used as a front, the real land visits, the ghost contractor, the manufactured legal dispute, the escalating fees. An Australian named Terry had lost his entire accessible savings, 230,000 Australian dollars, and was now living on his pension alone in a rented room, his wife of 40 years having left him when she understood what had happened. Listening to them, I began to understand something that my individual experience had obscured. This was not a crime of opportunity. This was an industry. The syndicate model, as best as anyone in the group had been able to reconstruct it, operated with division of labor. Someone managed the Facebook groups and planted referrals. Someone played the trusted agent. Someone played the contractor. Someone played the lawyer. The roles rotated between schemes. The same players appeared in different configurations. Victims comparing notes sometimes recognized a name or a photograph from another man's account, a detail that confirmed what felt almost impossible to accept, which was that Maricel and Bong and the lawyer had not assembled themselves around Ronald Chambers specifically. They had assembled themselves around a type, and Ronald fit the type precisely. Retired, male, Western, financially stable, emotionally isolated, searching for something, arrived with enough capital to make the extraction worthwhile and enough loneliness to make the trust building efficient. The group met every Tuesday. I kept going. What I know now, sitting in the same rented apartment where I have lived for the past several months, is this. The most dangerous moment in the entire sequence was not when I wired the first $52,000. It was much earlier. It was the evening I drove home from that first coffee shop meeting and thought, this woman is different. That thought, that single evaluative conclusion, was what they had been engineering from the moment I sent Maricel my first message. Everything that followed, every property tour, every shared dinner, every careful disclosure about her mother's medication and her brother's education. Every moment she talked me out of a commission, she could have easily taken all of it, was designed to produce that thought in that specific form. Romance scam is a convenient shorthand, but it obscures the precision involved. What happened to me was not primarily a romantic manipulation. It was a comprehensive trust construction, a process by which a team of professionals over 14 months built and furnished an entire alternative reality, complete with real land I could stand on, real documents I could hold, and a real woman whose warmth felt genuine because it was deployed with enough skill that the warmth itself became indistinguishable from the performance. The most sophisticated element was the pacing. Nothing moved quickly. There were no aggressive requests, no manufactured urgencies in the early months, no emotional pressure that might trigger the caution of a methodical man. They gave me time. They let me verify things. They allowed me to feel in control of every decision. And by the time the extractions began, I was so deeply invested financially, emotionally, psychologically that each new crisis felt like a problem to be solved rather than a pattern to be recognized. I have thought a great deal about what would have saved me. The honest answer is earlier and louder skepticism from people outside the situation. Graham saved me from losing another $18,000 with one direct conversation over beer. If someone had found me in month 4 and said the same things to me that Graham said in month 10, I might have walked away with most of my capital intact. Which is why I'm telling you this now. If you are watching this and you are considering retiring in the Philippines or anywhere in Southeast Asia, I want you to hear what I have learned. The first thing is this. A real estate license is not protection. Maricel had a genuine license. That license was the front, not the safeguard. Anyone who points to their credentials as a reason to skip independent verification is either naive about how these schemes work or is counting on your willingness to let credentials substitute for due diligence. The second thing, if you are buying or leasing property as a foreigner, hire your own attorney, not a lawyer introduced to you by the agent, not someone from the agent's referral network, but a professional you find independently through the Integrated Bar of the Philippines or through an embassy referral. Pay their fee yourself before anything is signed. Make this non-negotiable. The third thing, any title document you receive should be verified in person at the Registry of Deeds in the relevant province, not by the agent on your behalf. By you, in person, with the physical document. This is a half-day process that could have saved me $128,000. The fourth thing, independent price verification. If a property is priced significantly below market value, and the explanation involves an elderly landowner in urgent need of cash, the explanation is the trap. Properties priced to create urgency are priced that way specifically because urgency compromises judgment. The fifth and most important thing, isolation is the substrate on which all of this grows. I was an isolated man in an unfamiliar country, and the most valuable service Maricel provided the daily texts, the dinners. The sense of having an ally in a complicated place cost her almost nothing to provide and bought her 14 months of access to my judgment. The loneliness that drove me to the Philippines in the first place was the same loneliness that made me incapable of seeing clearly what was happening. If you are lonely, that is not a shameful thing, but it is a vulnerability, and in the environment of foreign retirement, it is one that organized criminal networks have studied, mapped, and learned to exploit with considerable sophistication. Find community before you find property. Build a social network in your destination country before you make significant financial commitments. Because the man who would never have wired $52,000 to a stranger on day 1 will wire it on day 90 if the stranger has, by then, become the most important human connection in his daily life. Ronald Chambers still lives in Cebu, not in the retirement home he once stood in front of, watching the sun fall into the Tanyan Strait. That land, if it was ever legally anyone's, was never legally his. The lot exists. The walls he paid to have built still stand in the coastal grass, unfinished, a monument to someone else's profit. He rents a small apartment. He attends the Tuesday group. He has shared his story in expat forums under his first name, and the messages he receives in return are, without exception, from men who say some version of the same thing. Thank you, because I was about to do exactly what you did. He has not booked a flight back to Arizona. The life he had there is no longer there to return to. The life he came here to build no longer exists. He is living in the gap between those two facts, trying to find a third option. He is 62 years old. He has $161,000 remaining. He has a pension and a Social Security payment that arrive reliably every month. He has, he says, more clarity now than he has had at any point in his adult life. The brutal, unwelcome clarity of a man who has had every illusion removed and is learning, slowly, to see what remains. What remains is enough to continue. It is not what he planned, but it is real. That, in the end, may be the most important thing Ronald learned, not the legal checklist, not the verification steps, not the red flags he can now recite in sequence. The most important thing is simpler and harder. Real things can be verified. Real land has a clean title. Real contractors have registered licenses. Real love does not require you to fund someone else's manufactured emergencies. Real life, even an imperfect and diminished one, has the quality of being checkable against reality. Everything he lost was paid for with the inability to check. If Ronald's story sounds familiar, if you recognize the architecture of what happened to him in something that is currently happening to you, stop. Stop the payments. Hire an independent attorney tomorrow, not one introduced to you through your agent or your romantic partner, but one you find yourself. Verify every document at the issuing authority in person. Call your embassy. Tell someone who knows you in your home country what is happening before the next payment is due. The people running these schemes rely on your silence and your shame and your hope. They rely on the fact that admitting you might be wrong means admitting that everything you have already paid was for nothing. That psychological trap, the sunk cost that makes each new payment feel like the only way to protect the previous ones, is the mechanism that keeps victims inside the scheme long after every rational signal is pointing toward the exit. Ronald got out. Not without damage, not without loss, not without a future that looks nothing like the one he planned, but he got out. Others have not been so fortunate. There are men in expat Facebook groups right now who are in month 6 or month 9 of a scheme identical to this one, writing the 3rd or 4th tranche check, waiting for construction to resume, trusting the woman who told them she was fighting on their behalf. This story is for them. If you're finding value in these investigations, please consider subscribing to this channel. Every subscription helps keep these stories reaching the people who need them most, and these are exactly the stories that don't get told anywhere else.